I never imagined that the person who shared a room with me for 15 years, who taught me to ride a bike and defended me from bullies at school, would be the same person to stab me in the back in the most cowardly way possible. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 32 years old. I'm an operations manager at a logistics company in Portland, Oregon. And today my life turned upside down when I discovered that my older brother Marcus wasn't the man I thought I knew. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. What I'm about to tell you will make you rethink everything about family loyalty and how far someone can go for greed. It all started on an ordinary Tuesday morning when I woke up thinking my biggest problem would be the meeting with investors at 2 in the afternoon. I was completely wrong. Marcus was always my hero. 5 years older, he was everything I wanted to be when I grew up. A business administration graduate from the University of Washington, married to Amy for 8 years, 2 beautiful children, a house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. We worked together at the company our father founded 30 years ago, Carter Logistics, a modest but profitable operation that moved about $3 million a year. Dad passed away 2 years ago from a sudden heart attack, and in his will, he left the company divided 50-50 between me and Marcus. I took care of the day-to-day operations, the logistics themselves, while Marcus was responsible for the financial and administrative side. It was a perfect partnership, or at least that's what I believed until this morning. My wife Jennifer was making coffee when my cell phone rang. It was an unknown number, one of those with an area code you don't recognize. Normally I would ignore it, but something made me answer. On the other end of the line, a nervous female voice introduced herself as Melissa Grant, an accountant for a firm that provides services to several companies in the Portland area. She said she needed to speak to me urgently about irregularities she had discovered in Carter Logistics accounts. My stomach immediately churned. Financial irregularities were the kind of thing that could destroy a company in a matter of weeks, especially with the government contracts we had. Melissa asked to meet in person, saying she couldn't talk on the phone. We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop on the other side of town, far from our office. When I arrived at 9 in the morning, I found a woman in her 40s with grey hair and sunken eyes, as if she hadn't slept in days. She was trembling, holding a cup of coffee. She handed me a brown folder full of documents and told me to look at it carefully before saying anything. I opened the folder and felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. They were bank statements, transfers, fake invoices, a complete trail of embezzlement that had been going on for at least 18 months. My blood ran cold when I saw the name on the transfer authorizations. Marcus Andrew Carter, my brother, my partner, my best friend since I was born. He was systematically and deliberately embezzling money from the company. These weren't small amounts. We're talking about monthly transfers ranging from $15,000 to $45,000, always on different dates, always to offshore accounts in tax havens. In total, over the last 18 months, Marcus had stolen more than $500,000 from our family business. $500,000 that were half mine, half his, built with our father's sweat over 3 decades. Melissa explained that she discovered the scheme by accident while conducting a routine audit for another client and noticed suspicious activity in reports that cross-referenced with our company. She said she struggled with her conscience for weeks before calling me because she knew it would destroy a family, but she had 2 young children and couldn't sleep, knowing she was complicit in a crime by remaining silent. I thanked her with tears in my eyes and promised I would do the right thing. When I left that coffee shop, I was a different man. Innocence had been ripped from me with the force of a typhoon. I spent the next 4 hours in my car, parked at a lookout point overlooking the Columbia River, just staring at the documents repeatedly. Each page was a stab in the back. Each transfer was a lie. Each of my brother's signatures was a betrayal. I remembered all the times Marcus had looked me in the eye in the last few months and lied. When I said profits were down because of the economy, when he suggested we cut my salary by 10% to keep the company healthy while he was lining his pockets with stolen money, when he complained he couldn't lend me $5,000 to renovate the bathroom because he was strapped for cash. The worst part was remembering Thanksgiving last year. We were all gathered at our mother's house in Vancouver, Washington. Marcus made an emotional toast, thanking everyone for being there for us, for being a united family even after Dad's death, for keeping his legacy alive through the company. He cried. He hugged everyone. He told me I was the best brother anyone could have. And during that whole charade, he had already stolen over $200,000. I sat there in my car and cried, like I hadn't cried since my father's funeral. It wasn't just about the money, although $500,000 was an amount that would completely change my life and my children's future. It was the betrayal. It was knowing that the person I trusted most in the whole world had seen me as an idiot, as someone easy to deceive. I called Jennifer and told her everything. She was silent for a long time before exploding in fury. My wife always had her reservations about Marcus, saying he was too calculating, that he smiled too much. I always defended my brother, saying she was being unfair. At that moment on the phone, she didn't say, "I told you so," but she didn't need to. The hurt in her voice said it all. She asked me what I was going to do, and I replied that I didn't know yet. But one thing I was absolutely certain of: Marcus was going to pay for every penny stolen and for every lie told. I spent the rest of the afternoon researching lawyers specializing in corporate fraud and white-collar crime. I found an office in downtown Portland with an excellent reputation. I scheduled an emergency appointment for the next day at 8 in the morning. I also began gathering more evidence on my own. I accessed our company's banking system with my credentials and downloaded all the statements from the last 2 years. I made copies of all the contracts, agreements, and documents that Marcus had made me sign without properly reading them in recent months. Each of my innocent signatures on those papers now seemed like a confession of complicity, even though I knew nothing about it. While I was gathering the evidence, my cell phone rang. It was Marcus. My finger hovered over the answer button for long seconds. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately, scream, demand explanations. But the rational part, the part that still functioned despite the emotional storm, told me to wait. I let it go to voicemail. He left a casual message asking if I wanted to watch the Portland Trail Blazers game with him on the weekend. Said he'd gotten some good tickets. The obscene normalcy of that message, as if nothing had happened, as if he wasn't destroying everything our father had built, made me nauseous. Jennifer came home early from work. She's a high school teacher and had a parent-teacher meeting, but she cancelled everything to stay with me. We sat in the living room and she held my hand while I broke down. I talked about how betrayed I felt, not only as a business partner, but as a brother. How every good childhood memory was now tarnished by the discovery of who Marcus really was. She reminded me that I hadn't done anything wrong, that the fault was entirely his, that good people sometimes discover they love people who don't deserve that love, but knowing this intellectually didn't lessen the pain. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the plans Marcus must have had, thinking about how he was going to use that stolen money. Did he have another life I didn't know about? A mistress, a gambling addiction, secret debts? Or was it simply pure greed, the kind of greed that makes someone steal from their own blood without a second thought? I also thought about Amy, my sister-in-law, and my nephews Jake and Sophie. Did they know? Was Amy an accomplice or just another victim? And the children would suffer when everything blew up, as it inevitably would. At 3 in the morning, I made a decision. Marcus wasn't just going to return the money. He wasn't simply going to apologize and move on. There wasn't going to be a reconciliation hug or emotional forgiveness at the end of this story. My brother had made a conscious choice to betray me, to betray our family, to betray our father's memory. And now he was going to face the full consequences of his actions. I was going to the police. I was going to sue. I was going to make him answer criminally for fraud, embezzlement, and any other charge my lawyer could pull off. And most importantly, I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of person Marcus Carter really was, beneath the mask of the perfect brother. As the sun began to rise, I grabbed my phone and sent Marcus a single message. Just 5 words that sealed his fate and destroyed our relationship forever. "I know everything, Marcus." His reply came in seconds. "Can we talk?" I deleted the message without replying. The time for conversations was over. Now it was time for justice, no matter the price our family would have to pay. And believe me, the price would be high for everyone, but especially for the man I used to call brother. The next morning arrived heavy as lead. Jennifer made strong coffee and scrambled eggs, but the food felt like sawdust in my mouth. My cell phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Marcus had called me 17 times during the night and sent 23 text messages. Each message was a variation on the same theme. "We need to talk. You're misunderstanding. Let me explain. Please don't do anything rash." The word rash irritated me deeply, as if discovering that your brother stole $500,000 required deliberation and calm. As if there were any reasonable explanation for 18 months of systematic theft and elaborate lies. At 7:45 a.m., I parked my Toyota Camry in front of the Morrison & Associates law office, a sleek glass and steel building in the heart of downtown Portland. The receptionist offered me gourmet coffee that probably cost more per cup than I spent on lunch. I sat in a soft leather chair, leafing through a business magazine without really reading anything. My mind was elsewhere, reliving every interaction with Marcus over the past few months, searching for signs I should have seen. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let him deceive me so completely? Thomas Morrison was exactly the kind of lawyer you see in movies. Perfectly combed grey hair, a suit that probably cost more than my car, a presence that exuded competence and authority. He greeted me with a firm handshake and guided me to his office where mahogany walls and framed diplomas created an atmosphere of utter seriousness. I spread all the documents Melissa had given me on his desk, along with the additional evidence I had gathered. Morrison put on his reading glasses and spent the next hour and a half examining each page with meticulous attention, making notes on a cool yellow notepad. When he finally looked up, his expression was grave. He bluntly stated that the case was rock solid. Marcus had left a trail of evidence that any prosecutor would love to have. The transfers were clear, the document forgeries were obvious, and the systematic pattern proved premeditation. Morrison explained that we were talking about multiple criminal charges: embezzlement, fraud, forgery of corporate documents, possible money laundering through offshore accounts. If convicted on all charges, Marcus was looking at something between 10 and 20 years in federal prison. My stomach churned at the sound of those numbers. Morrison asked me directly what I wanted. He said we could go 2 ways. The first was to confront Marcus privately, offering a deal where he would return the money with interest and withdraw completely from the company in exchange for not going to the police. The second way was all-out war, criminal charges, civil lawsuit to recover the funds, forced dissolution of the partnership, all done under the spotlight of the law. He warned me that the second way would be expensive, emotionally devastating, and public. Our family would be in the headlines. Amy and the children would suffer. My mother would have to choose sides. It would be ugly in ways I couldn't fully imagine yet. I looked out the office window at the city below. People walking to work, living their normal lives, unaware that in that room I was making a decision that would destroy my family. I thought of my father. What would he do? He always preached forgiveness, family above all else, resolving problems internally. But he was also a man of principle who built an honest business with hard work and integrity. Would he have forgiven a theft of $500,000? Would he have embraced a son who spat on everything he stood for? I didn't know the answer, and it was killing me inside. I took a deep breath and told Morrison to prepare the criminal complaint. He nodded gravely and said he would contact the federal prosecutor's office that afternoon. We would also begin a civil lawsuit to freeze all of Marcus's assets and trace the stolen money. Morrison estimated his fees would be around $75,000, but that we would probably recover that from Marcus eventually. I signed the representation agreement with trembling hands. Each signature seemed to seal my family's fate. There was no turning back after that. I left Morrison's office at 10:30 in the morning with a strange feeling of emptiness. I had begun a process that could not be stopped. Legal machines were now in motion, gears that would grind my brother slowly but inevitably. I should have felt relieved to be doing the right thing, but all I felt was a deep, piercing sadness. Marcus had been my brother for 32 years. In a matter of hours, he would become my legal adversary, a criminal in the eyes of the law, someone I had helped put behind bars. I was getting into my car when my phone rang. It was an unknown number again. I answered, hoping it was Morrison with an update, but the voice on the other end was Amy's, my sister-in-law. She was crying uncontrollably. "Daniel, please tell me this isn't true. Tell me you're not going to destroy our marriage, our family. Marcus is here at home, distraught. He admitted everything. He said he did something terrible, but that he can fix it. Please. You have children. You know what it's like to love your family. Think about Jake and Sophie. They're going to lose their father." The pain in her voice was genuine and cutting. Amy had always been a good person, a dedicated elementary school teacher who donated her weekends to literacy programs. She didn't deserve this. The children definitely didn't deserve it. But I didn't deserve to be robbed either. My wife didn't deserve to see half of our financial security evaporate. The Carter Logistics employees who depended on their jobs didn't deserve to work for a company looted by its own owner. Where was Marcus's concern for the consequences when he was transferring money to secret accounts? I told Amy that I was deeply sorry that she and the children were going to suffer, but that Marcus made those decisions knowing exactly what he was doing. She begged for a chance for us all to talk together, to find a solution. I said it was too late, that the lawyers were already involved, that lawsuits were already being prepared. She hung up crying, and I sat in the parking lot feeling like the villain of the story, even knowing that the real villain was at home receiving comfort from the wife he cheated on. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I went to the Carter Logistics office for the first time since the discovery. Our small commercial building in an industrial district of Portland had never felt so oppressive. I entered through the back door to avoid employees and went straight to my office. I needed to start separating my things from Marcus's, documenting everything that could be relevant to the case. I was buried in files when I heard the door open. It was Marcus. He looked 10 years older than the last time I saw him 5 days ago. Red, swollen eyes, unshaven, clothes rumpled. He closed the door behind him and stood there, unsure what to say. Finally, he murmured my name as a question. "Daniel?" I continued organizing papers without looking at him. I had nothing to say. He stepped forward. "I need to explain. I need you to understand why I did this." That's when I exploded. I swiveled my chair and looked him straight in the eyes for the first time. "Understand? You want me to understand how my own brother stole $500,000 from our dead father's company? Explain this to me, Marcus. Make me understand." Marcus began speaking rapidly, his words stumbling over one another. He said he'd gotten into online gambling debts 2 years ago, that it started small but quickly spiraled out of control, that he owed money to dangerous people, people who threatened Amy and the children, that he panicked and started withdrawing money from the company just to stay alive, that every time he tried to stop, the loan sharks tightened their grip, that he had a problem, an illness, that he wasn't really a criminal. Each word came out of him like a rehearsed excuse, and probably was. I stood up from my chair and walked until I was inches from his face. I spoke softly, but with an intensity that made him recoil. You had 18 months to tell me the truth. 18 months to ask your brother for help. Instead, you stole, lied, forged documents, and slept soundly while I worried about every penny of the company. You looked me in the eye on Thanksgiving and made a toast to family while you had $200,000 stolen from the bank. Don't give me any excuses about illness. You made choices, Marcus. Now you'll face the consequences. He then began to cry for real, that kind of convulsive crying that comes from genuine despair. He fell to his knees, literally to his knees, and begged. He offered me everything, his share of the company, his house, the children's college fund, everything he had. He said he would sell everything and work the rest of his life to pay me back, that he would turn himself in for gambling addiction treatment, go to therapy, anything. Just don't send me to prison. Don't destroy his children by taking their father away. I looked at that man huddled on the office floor and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity, no brotherly love. Just an immense void where my brother used to be. I told him it was too late, that the complaint was already being prepared, that in a matter of days, maybe hours, federal agents would come to arrest him, that he should use the time he had left to explain to his children why their dad was leaving. Marcus stayed there on the floor for another minute before slowly getting up. The expression on his face changed then. Despair gave way to something darker, anger, resentment. He wiped away his tears and pointed a trembling finger at me. You're going to regret this, Daniel. You're going to destroy this family, and in the end, you'll realize you lost more than you gained. Mom will never forgive you. You'll be alone with your sense of justice and your indignation, while everyone blames you for the destruction. He stormed out, slamming the door. I sat back down in my chair and realized I was trembling, not from fear, but from pure adrenaline. I had just watched the last vestiges of the brother I knew disappear completely. In his place was only a frightened criminal trying any manipulation that would work. The threat against my mother had been particularly cruel because it was true. She was going to side with him. She always had. Marcus was the firstborn, the golden boy who could do anything wrong but would always be forgiven, and I was about to become the son who destroyed the family. That night at home, Jennifer hugged me tightly when I told her about the confrontation. She said I had been strong, that I'd done the right thing, that real family doesn't steal from each other. But even she seemed worried about what was to come. We knew the storm was only beginning. The next few days and weeks would test everything: our marriage, my relationship with my mother, the stability of the company, everything. And there was no guarantee we would come out unscathed. But one thing I knew for sure: there was no going back. Marcus had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and now we would both have to live with the consequences of his choices for the rest of our lives. The bomb exploded 48 hours later. 2 FBI agents showed up at Marcus's house at 6 in the morning on a Thursday. I knew because my mother called me screaming, hysterical, saying that I had destroyed my brother's life, that I was a heartless monster, that my father would be ashamed of me. She hung up before I could say anything in my defense. Jennifer held my hand across the breakfast table while I processed that I had officially lost my mother as well. Marcus had wasted no time in telling his version of the story, painting himself as a victim of circumstances and portraying me as the cruel and vengeful brother. Morrison called me an hour later, confirming that Marcus had been formally charged and released on $250,000 bail. He had to use the house as collateral. The formal charge included 7 different federal crimes related to fraud and embezzlement. The first preliminary hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks from now. Morrison also warned me that we needed to prepare for Marcus to hire an equally aggressive lawyer who would try to turn this into a family dispute rather than a clear criminal case. The strategy would be to make me look greedy and vindictive, someone using the legal system to settle personal differences. The news leaked to the local press surprisingly quickly. The Portland Tribune published a small article in the business section, "Logistics Company Partners Face Fraud Charges." They didn't use our full names, but anyone who knew Carter Logistics would know exactly who the Carter brothers mentioned were. My phone exploded with messages from acquaintances, some offering support, others clearly fishing for gossip. The worst were the messages from the company's employees, 12 people who had worked with us for years, suddenly worried about whether they would have jobs on Monday. I scheduled an emergency meeting with the entire team on Friday morning. I arrived at the office half an hour early and found some already waiting worried faces, whispered conversations that stopped when they saw me. I took a deep breath and gathered everyone in the conference room, which still smelled of yesterday's stale coffee. I looked at those faces, people who trusted me and Marcus to keep their jobs secure, their families fed, their children in college. Sarah, our dispatcher for 15 years. Tom, warehouse supervisor since my father opened the operation. Lisa, the administrative assistant who sent birthday cards to everyone. I owed them the truth. I explained the situation as directly as possible without going into legal details. I said that Marcus had committed serious financial irregularities, that he was facing criminal charges, and that I was doing everything in my power to protect the company and their jobs. I assured them that their salaries were secure, that the contracts would continue to be honored, and that Carter Logistics would survive this. Sarah timidly raised her hand and asked what everyone was thinking. "Is Marcus coming back?" I shook my head. No. Marcus is no longer part of this company. From today onwards, I assume full control of operations until the legal situation is resolved. The tension in the room was palpable. Some seemed relieved, others clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. Tom, who had worked side by side with Marcus for years, had tears in his eyes. He said he couldn't believe it, that Marcus had always seemed like a decent guy, that family was sacred. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. I know, Tom. I didn't want to believe it either. But sometimes the people we love disappoint us in ways we never imagined possible. The only thing I can do now is ensure that everyone's hard work and my father's legacy are not destroyed because of his mistakes. After the meeting, I spent the rest of the day trying to stabilize operations. I needed to take on all the responsibilities Marcus had abandoned: financial approvals, negotiations with suppliers, meetings with clients. I quickly discovered he had left far more of a mess than I had imagined. Poorly negotiated contracts, overdue payments he had hidden from me, promises made to clients that were impossible to keep. It was as if, in recent months, he had simply stopped caring, knowing that everything would eventually fall apart. Negligence was almost as damaging as theft. In the middle of the afternoon, I received an unexpected visit. Amy appeared in the office with swollen eyes, clutching a handbag as if it were a shield. Lisa tried to stop her, but I signaled for her to pass. Amy entered my office and closed the door. We stood in silence for a long moment, just staring at each other across the chasm Marcus had created between our families. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling but controlled. "I didn't come to ask you to drop the charges. I know you won't. I came to ask you to understand that I knew nothing. My children knew nothing, and we will pay for this for the rest of our lives." I offered her a chair, and she sat down heavily. Amy explained that Marcus had hidden everything from her as well. The gambling debts, the threats, the loans from loan sharks, everything. She thought they were financially stable, that the house was paid off, that the children's college fund was growing. Now she discovered that the house had a second mortgage that Marcus had secretly taken out, that the college fund had been emptied, that they owed money to dangerous people in 3 different states. She had consulted a divorce lawyer that morning. After 8 years of marriage, he was filing for separation. The news caught me by surprise. Part of me had assumed Amy would side with Marcus, that she would play the loyal wife card. But she was as betrayed as I was, perhaps even more so. At least I had found out in time to salvage something. Amy had built an entire life on lies and now watched it all crumble. She told me that in the last 2 days she had discovered things she never imagined. She found hotel receipts, deleted but recovered messages, evidence that Marcus possibly had a mistress for at least a year. The game wasn't the only secret, it was just the tip of the iceberg. I felt a new rage burning inside me. It wasn't enough to steal and lie about business. Marcus had betrayed Amy too. He had jeopardized not only our assets, but the emotional and financial security of the family itself. I looked at my sister-in-law, this woman who had always been kind to me, who made Sunday dinner and remembered to send Christmas presents, and I saw someone completely broken. Amy asked if I thought she could get any protection in the civil proceedings, if there was any way to ensure the house wouldn't be seized, that the children would at least have some stability. I promised her I would speak to Morrison about protecting her interests and the children's. I explained that legally she was married to Marcus when the crimes occurred, so some assets could be considered joint property and subject to forfeiture. But there was precedent for protecting innocent spouses, especially when children were involved. Amy thanked me with tears streaming down her face and left. I sat there for a long time after she was gone, processing how many lives Marcus had destroyed with his choices. It wasn't just him and me. It was Amy, Jake, Sophie, my mother, Jennifer, our employees, all picking up the pieces of something he had shattered. That night, Jennifer suggested we call my mother and try to explain our side of the story. I was reluctant, still hurting from the way she had attacked me on the phone, but I agreed we needed to try. I called her number at 8 o'clock that night. She answered on the 5th ring, her voice cold. "What do you want, Daniel?" I took a deep breath and said I wanted to explain what really happened, show her the evidence, make her understand she had no choice. She cut me off. "I don't want to hear your excuses. You put your own brother in jail. What kind of person does that? Family resolves problems at home, not in court." I tried to explain about the $500,000, about the systematic forgery, about the 18 months of lies. She wouldn't listen. She said Marcus had already explained everything, that he had a problem that needed help, not prison, that I was cruel and ruthless, just like my father at his worst. The comparison to my father when he was angry was like a punch to the gut. She knew exactly where to hit. I told her I was sorry she felt that way, but that I had done what was right, what our father would have done. She laughed bitterly. Her father would have forgiven. Her father valued family above all else. "You're different, you're tough, cold, and one day you'll regret it." She hung up. Jennifer hugged me as I broke down. My mother's rejection hurt in a different way than Marcus's betrayal. With Marcus, I was angry to sustain myself. With my mother, I only felt sadness. She had chosen the side of the son who committed crimes instead of the son who was a victim. It wasn't fair, it wasn't rational, but it was the reality. Jennifer whispered in my ear that sometimes doing the right thing cost everything, but that in the end I would be able to look in the mirror. I wanted to believe her, but that night, looking at my reflection in the dark living room window, I wasn't sure I recognized the man staring back. The weekend passed in a haze of work and worry. I spent all of Saturday in the office trying to organize the financial mess Marcus left behind. I uncovered more irregularities, signed contracts that put us at a disadvantage, verbal agreements he had made without proper documentation. Each new discovery was another layer of betrayal, further evidence that he had stopped caring about the company a long time ago. Sunday was dedicated to meetings with Morrison, reviewing legal strategy, preparing depositions, organizing evidence. The legal machine was in motion, and I was just another cog in the machine. On Monday morning, I woke up early with a knot in my stomach. He had to go to court for a preliminary hearing about freezing assets. It would be the first time I'd seen Marcus since the confrontation in the office. Jennifer insisted on going with me. We dressed in our best clothes as if we were going to a funeral, and in a way we were. It was our family's funeral, the way it used to be. We drove to the federal courthouse in silence, each lost in our own thoughts about how we'd gotten there. The courtroom was cold and impersonal, just like you see on TV. Hard wooden benches, people speaking in hushed voices, the smell of old paper and anxiety. Marcus sat across the room with his lawyer, a man in an expensive suit named Robert Ashford, who had a reputation for successfully defending white-collar criminals. Marcus glanced at me once, briefly, and I saw something in his gaze that chilled me. It wasn't regret or sadness. It was pure hatred. In that moment, I understood that I had lost my brother completely and irrevocably. The person sitting there was no longer Marcus Carter, my brother. He was a stranger who blamed me for his own destruction. The judge entered and everyone stood. She was a middle-aged woman with her hair pulled back in a severe bun and glasses perched on the tip of her nose. Judge Patricia Hoffman, known for being tough but fair. Morrison had told me she had no patience for corporate fraud, that she came from a poor working-class family and viewed white-collar crime as particularly heinous. The hearing began with arguments about freezing Marcus's assets while the criminal case proceeded. Morrison presented evidence of flight risk, offshore accounts, and the sophistication of the fraud scheme. Ashford countered with arguments about family, innocent children, first offense, and addiction as an illness. Judge Hoffman listened to both sides with a neutral expression. Then she looked directly at Marcus and asked if he had anything to say. Marcus stood up, cleared his throat, and delivered a clearly rehearsed speech about repentance, about wanting to make amends, about family love. But when he mentioned my name, when he said, "Daniel, my brother, I hope that one day you will find in your heart the forgiveness that Jesus teaches us," I almost vomited. He was using religion, family, and morality as a defense after stealing $500,000. The hypocrisy was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Judge Hoffman clearly thought the same because her expression visibly hardened. She banged the gavel and ordered the freezing of all of Marcus's assets, except for a limited fund for basic expenses and legal defense. She also ordered him to surrender all passports and be restricted to the state of Oregon. Marcus sank into his chair as if he had been punched. Ashford tried to argue, but the judge raised her hand. "Mr. Ashford, your client operated a sophisticated fraud scheme for 18 months, stealing from his own family and company. He has access to funds in multiple countries and has demonstrated a blatant lack of respect for the law and trust. He is exactly the type of defendant for whom these measures were designed. Next hearing in 30 days. We're closed." We left the courthouse in opposite directions. As I walked to the car, I felt Marcus's eyes on my back. I didn't turn around. There was nothing else to see there. Jennifer squeezed my hand and said she was proud of me, that I had stayed strong. But I didn't feel strong. I felt exhausted, empty, like I'd run a marathon only to find out there was still 20 miles to go. And the scariest part was knowing that this was just the beginning. The real trial was still months ahead. Months of lawyers, of hearings, of seeing my brother on the other side of the courtroom hating me more and more. I got into the car and closed my eyes, wishing I could go back in time and just close that door, when my mother-in-law showed up with 3 suitcases. Wait, that wasn't the beginning of this story. But it seemed like every family tragedy started with a simple moment where you could have said no, but didn't. The following weeks turned into an exhausting routine of working during the day and preparing for legal matters at night. Carter Logistics was bleeding clients. 3 of our biggest contracts were cancelled when the purchasing managers saw the news about the criminal charges. It didn't matter that I explained I was the victim, that I was doing everything right. To them, family drama meant risk, and risk meant looking for another logistics provider. In 2 weeks, our revenue dropped by 40%. I had to cut overtime and freeze hiring. The cruel irony was that Marcus had stolen $500,000, and now his exposure was potentially costing us twice as much in lost business. Morrison called me Thursday afternoon with news I wasn't expecting. The federal prosecutor's office had uncovered something new during their investigation of Marcus's offshore accounts. Apparently, he wasn't just embezzling money from Carter Logistics. He had also created shell companies that billed 3 of our biggest clients for non-existent services. Basically, Marcus was charging clients for deliveries that never happened, pocketing the difference through the shell companies, and then manipulating our internal records to cover the holes. The scheme was even more sophisticated and criminal than anyone had imagined. We were looking at a potential total of over $800,000 in fraud. I felt my world crumble again. It wasn't just money stolen from our company. Marcus had actively harmed our clients. He had committed fraud against corporations that had entire legal departments. When those companies found out, and they would find out because the prosecution would have to notify them as part of the investigation, they wouldn't just cancel contracts. They would sue us. They would sue me because legally I was a co-owner and co-responsible for all of Carter Logistics operations. Marcus hadn't just destroyed his own future, he had planted a legal time bomb under mine as well. I scheduled an emergency meeting with Morrison and 2 corporate lawyers from his firm. We spent 4 hours in that conference room mapping out my legal exposure. The conclusion wasn't good. As a co-owner and co-signatory on many of the contracts, I could be held legally responsible for Marcus's fraudulent actions, even without knowing about them. The best defense would be to prove that I was diligent, that there was no reasonable way for me to detect the scheme, that I was a victim as much as the clients. But proving that would mean opening all our books, submitting to brutal depositions, and potentially spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on legal defense. One of the lawyers, a woman named Patricia Chen, who specialized in corporate litigation, suggested we consider strategic bankruptcy. Dissolve Carter Logistics before the lawsuits even started, declare insolvency, and start over with a clean slate. My father had spent 30 years building that company. It was his legacy, the testament to a lifetime of hard work. The idea of simply abandoning it, of letting Marcus win so definitively, made me physically ill. But Patricia was direct. Sometimes you have to amputate a limb to save the body, Daniel. If you try to save the company, you could lose everything. Your house, your savings, your children's future. I came home that night completely devastated. Jennifer immediately sensed that something more than normal was wrong. We sat on the back deck with a bottle of wine neither of us actually drank, and I told her everything. The full extent of Marcus's fraud, my potential legal liability, the recommendation to declare bankruptcy. I saw the fear grow in her eyes as she processed what that meant. We had 2 children, 7-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Lucas. We had a mortgage, student loans we were still paying off, a life carefully built over a decade. And all of that was at risk because of the actions of a man I had loved, as only a brother can love. Jennifer held my hands and said something I'll never forget. "Daniel, I didn't marry Carter Logistics. I married you. If we need to start over, we'll start over. We'll sell the house if necessary. I'll go back to work full-time. We'll find a way. But you can't let this destroy you inside. Your father built that company with integrity and honest work. He would be proud of you for not succumbing to fraud. Companies can be rebuilt, families can be rebuilt, but your integrity, once lost, never returns." Those words broke me in a way that none of Marcus's betrayals had managed to. The next day, I woke up with a strange clarity. I'd spent weeks reacting, defending, trying to fix what Marcus had broken. But defense wasn't enough. I needed an offensive. I called Morrison and said I wanted to hire a private investigator. I wanted every detail of Marcus's life over the past 5 years documented. Every bank account, every transaction, every trip, every person he did business with. If he had a mistress, I wanted her name and address. If he owed money to loan sharks, I wanted to know who they were. If there were more hidden frauds, I wanted to find them before they blew up in my face. Morrison tried to warn me that it would be expensive, but I didn't care anymore. I was already bleeding financially. At least this way I could control where the blood went. The investigator Morrison recommended was a former Portland police officer named Frank Delaney. In his 50s with short, graying hair, he had that look that comes from seeing a lot of bad things in life. We met at a diner on the outskirts of town where no one would recognize us. Frank listened to my story without interrupting, making occasional notes in a battered notebook. When I finished, he looked at me over his coffee cup and said something that stuck with me. "You know how, when you start digging into the life of someone you loved, especially family, you always find more than you bargained for. And you're not always going to like what you find. Not always about them. Sometimes about yourself, about your judgment, about how much you chose not to see." I told Frank I didn't care, that I'd already lost my brother, possibly my mother, potentially my company and my financial security, that there was nothing left of Marcus to lose. Frank nodded slowly. "Okay, but there's one thing. If I find evidence of more crimes, I have a legal obligation to report it. If I find something that implicates you, even unintentionally, it could harm you. Are you sure you want to open this Pandora's box?" I looked out the diner window at the city outside, normal people living normal lives, and thought about how unrecognizable my life had become in a matter of weeks. "I need to know the whole truth, Frank, whatever it is." Frank began his work immediately. Within 72 hours, he already had preliminary information. Marcus did indeed have a mistress. Her name was Veronica Simmons, 28 years old, working as a manager at an upscale restaurant in downtown Portland. They met in an apartment Marcus rented in the name of one of his shell companies. Frank had photos of Marcus entering and leaving the apartment, photos of Veronica, photos of them together in restaurants, holding hands like a normal couple. The date of the first photos Frank managed to recover from security cameras in the area was 3 years ago. 3 years. Marcus had been living a complete double life for 3 years. I showed the photos to Amy. I know it sounds cruel, but she deserved to know. We met at a Starbucks, and I spread the prints on the table between our coffee cups. I watched the life drain from her face as she looked at each image. She didn't cry. I think she had no tears left. She just sat there, looking at the visual evidence that her marriage had been a lie long before the criminal charges. Finally, she asked if I knew how much Marcus was paying for the apartment. $200 a month, I replied. She laughed bitterly. $200 a month for his mistress, while I was cutting up coupons and buying the kids' clothes at thrift stores because he said we needed to save money. Amy took the photos and put them in her bag. She said her divorce lawyer would love them. Then she looked at me with an expression that was part anger, part something more complex. Did you know, Daniel, all these years you had some idea and didn't tell me? The question cut me off because I had asked myself the same question. Were there signs I ignored, conversations interrupted when I entered a room, Marcus compulsively checking his phone, business trips that seemed unnecessary? Honestly, I didn't know. Either I had been so blind that I didn't see, or Marcus was a better liar than anyone imagined. Probably a bit of both. Frank called the following week with more findings. He had traced Marcus's offshore accounts and found transfers to online casinos registered in Malta and Gibraltar. Marcus wasn't lying about his gambling addiction, but the scale was beyond anything he had admitted. Over the past 3 years, he had moved more than $1.2 million through these gambling platforms. Some of these were deposits using stolen money, others were winnings that he quickly lost back. It was a vicious cycle of small wins and huge losses. Frank also found evidence of loans from at least 5 different loan sharks, totaling another $300,000 in debt. The image that was emerging was of a man completely out of control, living multiple secret lives, sinking deeper and deeper into a hole he had dug himself. But what disturbed me most was a specific discovery Frank made. He had gained access to Marcus's phone records through means I preferred not to inquire about. Over the past 6 months, Marcus had made dozens of calls to a number registered to a law firm specializing in fraud and asset protection in the Cayman Islands. Frank had a theory. He thought Marcus was planning an escape, gathering money, creating an alternate identity, preparing to disappear to a country without extradition before everything fell apart. The revelation left me breathless. It would have been even worse if Marcus had succeeded. If I hadn't found out when I did, he'd probably be on some Caribbean beach with Veronica right now, living off stolen money, while Amy and the kids, my mother, me, and all the Carter logistics employees dealt with the wreckage. And he probably would never have felt a shred of remorse. This realization changed something fundamental in me. Until that moment, part of me still clung to the idea that Marcus had lost his way, that he had made mistakes out of desperation or illness. But now he saw the truth. Marcus had made deliberate and calculated choices for his own benefit, without caring who he would destroy in the process. I took all the new evidence to Morrison. He was visibly impressed by the depth and scope of Marcus's scheme. He said it significantly changed the case. With evidence of planned escape, the prosecution could argue for pre-trial detention. With the full total of the fraud now documented at over $1 million, we were looking at potential sentences of 25 to 30 years. Marcus, if convicted on all charges, would spend the rest of his productive life in federal prison. His children would grow up without a father. He would lose everything, absolutely everything. I sat in Morrison's office after that meeting and felt something unexpected. It wasn't satisfaction or joy at justice. It was a deep, all-encompassing sadness. Marcus had had it all: a loving family, a profitable business, a devoted wife, healthy children, respect in the community. And he had thrown it all away for greed and addictions he refused to control. He had chosen lies over truth, selfishness over family, crime over integrity. And now we were all paying the price for his choices. I had started this process wanting justice, wanting Marcus to face consequences. But now that the consequences were becoming real and devastating, I discovered there was no victory in this, only loss on all sides. That night, I dreamt about my father. In the dream, we were in the old Carter logistics office before he died, and he was showing me how to fill out cargo manifest forms. Marcus was there too, younger, laughing at some joke I couldn't hear. Dad put his hands on our shoulders and said, "Take care of each other, boys. Family is all we have in the end." I woke up with my face wet with tears, realizing I had failed him in the most fundamental way possible. He hadn't been able to keep the family together. He hadn't saved my brother from himself. I hadn't protected the legacy he built. And as much as I told myself it was Marcus's fault, that I had done the right thing, part of me wondered if there was another way, a way that wouldn't end with us all shattered. The final bombshell exploded on a rainy Tuesday in March. Frank Delaney showed up at my office unannounced, his face more serious than usual, which was saying a lot for someone with his perpetually grave expression. He closed the door behind him and carefully placed a folder on my desk, as if it contained radioactive material. "Daniel, you need to sit down for this. I've found something that changes everything." My stomach churned. In the last few weeks, I'd learned that every time someone said they had important news, it meant my life was about to get even worse. I sat down and opened the folder. Inside were bank statements, printed emails, and corporate documents. It took me a few minutes to process what I was seeing, and when I finally understood, I felt the ground disappear beneath me. Marcus wasn't working alone. He had a partner in the fraud scheme, someone who helped him create shell companies, forge documents, and launder money through offshore accounts. And this partner wasn't a stranger or a professional criminal. It was Kevin Richardson, our accountant for 15 years, the man my father personally hired and trusted with every financial detail of Carter Logistics. Kevin, who came to the 4th of July barbecue every year. Kevin, who was godfather to Marcus's son, Jake. Kevin, who looked me in the eye every week in meetings and lied as smoothly as he breathed. He had been crucial to the scheme because he had access to everything and enough knowledge to cover his tracks. Frank explained how he discovered it. While tracking offshore accounts, he noticed that some of the transfers were made with credentials that couldn't possibly belong to Marcus based on the timestamps and location. He dug deeper and found emails between Marcus and Kevin discussing the details of the scheme, splitting the profits 60-40 in Marcus's favor. Kevin had pocketed at least $300,000 in the last 2 years. Even more impressively, Frank had evidence that Kevin was planning to embezzle even more now that Marcus was under investigation. Apparently, he thought that with all the attention on Marcus, he could continue stealing undetected. I called Morrison immediately. He cancelled other meetings and arrived at the office in 20 minutes. We went over all the evidence Frank had compiled. Morrison was visibly excited in a way that lawyers rarely are. "This is pure gold, Daniel. With Kevin as a confirmed co-conspirator, we can offer him a plea deal. He testifies against Marcus, gives us every detail of the scheme, and in return receives a reduced sentence. The prosecution will love this because it strengthens their case exponentially, and for you, it means your defense that you were deceived becomes much more credible. You had no way of knowing if even your accountant was working against you. But there was a problem. Kevin was still working for Carter Logistics. He still had access to all our systems, all our financial records, all our bank accounts. If he suspected we knew, he could destroy evidence or worse, empty the accounts and disappear. We needed to act fast, but cautiously. Morrison suggested coordinating with federal prosecutors to arrest Kevin and Marcus simultaneously. It would be a dramatic operation, but necessary to ensure neither had a chance to prepare or escape. We scheduled it for Friday morning, 3 days later. Those would be the 3 longest days of my life. I had to continue acting normally around Kevin for those 3 days. He showed up at the office every morning at 8:30, coffee in hand, easy smile on his face, asking how things were going, and offering help with the transition now that Marcus was gone. The nauseating hypocrisy of each interaction ate me up inside. I wanted to scream, ask him how he slept at night, how he could look at me knowing he had helped my brother rob me. But I remained calm, professional, giving him access to exactly the information he needed so as not to suspect anything. It was the hardest performance of my life. On Thursday night, The eve of the operation, Jennifer and I sat down with the children for a serious talk. Emma and Lucas knew something was wrong. Children always know. They had overheard whispered conversations, seen Mum and Dad stressed, noticed we no longer visited Uncle Marcus and Aunt Amy. We explained as simply as possible that Uncle Marcus had made bad choices that hurt many people, that sometimes adults make big mistakes, and that our family was going through a difficult time. Emma, always the most perceptive, asked if we still loved Uncle Marcus. The question caught me off guard. Jennifer looked at me, waiting for the answer. I took a deep breath and told the truth. I love the person I thought your Uncle Marcus was, but that person doesn't exist, baby. He deceived me. He deceived all of us. And when someone you love hurts you like that, love gets complicated. You can love who they were and still not be able to forgive what they did. Emma thought about it for a moment and then said something profound for a 7-year-old. So it's like when Molly lied to me at school and didn't want to be my friend anymore. You said I could be sad and angry at the same time. I smiled through my tears and hugged her tightly. Exactly like that, darling. Exactly like that. Friday dawned clear and cold. I woke at 5 in the morning, unable to sleep any longer. I took a long shower, letting the hot water wash away some of the tension. I put on my best suit because Morrison had said the press would likely be there. 2 simultaneous arrests in a high-profile corporate fraud case would be news. I drove to the Carter Logistics office, arriving at 7:15. Federal agents were already discreetly positioned in unmarked cars in the parking lot. Morrison was there too, along with Assistant District Attorney Helen Bradshaw, a woman in her 40s with a reputation for being ruthless with white-collar criminals. Kevin arrived punctually at 8:30 as usual. He parked his silver Honda Accord in his usual spot, grabbed his battered leather briefcase from the back seat, and walked toward the building's entrance, suspecting nothing. He was about 3 feet from the door when 4 federal agents got out of their cars and approached. Kevin Richardson, FBI, you are under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and money laundering. Put your hands where we can see them. Kevin's face went from confusion to shock to panic in a matter of seconds. He tried to run, which was stupid considering he was surrounded, but panic makes people do stupid things. 2 officers tackled him to the ground in the parking lot. The sound of his body hitting the concrete was loud in the silent morning. They handcuffed him while he yelled that it was a mistake, that he hadn't done anything, that he had a wife and children. The same excuses all criminals use when they get caught. I watched from inside the building behind my office window as they led Kevin to one of the cars. He saw me at the last second, before they got in with him in the back seat. Our eyes met through the glass, and I saw pure hatred in his gaze. No regret, no shame, just anger at being caught. Just like Marcus. Simultaneously, on the other side of town, another team of agents was arresting Marcus at his home. I later learned from Morrison that Marcus had tried to lock himself in his room, that Amy had to open the door for the agents, that the children cried watching their father being taken away in handcuffs. Part of me felt satisfaction at that, justice finally being served, but another part, a part I wished I could shut off, felt pain imagining Jake and Sophie witnessing it. It wasn't their fault that their father was a criminal. They didn't deserve that trauma. But deserving had nothing to do with how the world worked, as I had painfully learned in the last few weeks. The news spread quickly. By 10 in the morning, there were news vans from Channel 2 and Channel 8 parked in front of our building. Reporters with microphones were trying to get interviews with employees. Morrison had prepared me for this and helped me write an official statement. I left the building at noon and read the statement to the cameras, my hands trembling slightly as I held the paper. Today, justice is being served. My partner and brother Marcus Carter, along with our accountant Kevin Richardson, have been arrested for orchestrating an elaborate fraud scheme that victimized our family business, our clients, and their own families. I am grateful to the federal authorities for their diligent work in the investigation. Carter Logistics will fully cooperate with the prosecution. I will not answer questions at this time. Thank you. The questions came anyway, shouted by multiple reporters simultaneously. How could you not know? Are you going to sue for damages? Do you still love your brother? How much money was stolen? Will the company survive? I ignored them all and went back inside. Jennifer had come to pick me up because Morrison warned me not to drive after such an emotional day. She hugged me tightly in the parking lot away from the cameras and whispered that it was all over now, that the worst part was behind us. I wanted to believe her, but I knew it was only just beginning. The arrests were just the first chapter. The trial, the civil lawsuits, rebuilding the company and the family, all of that was still ahead. That night my mother finally called, first contact in weeks. Her voice sounded small, broken in a way I'd never heard before. Daniel, I saw it on TV. I saw them both being arrested, Kevin too, the whole time. I took a deep breath before answering. The whole time, Mom. Marcus wasn't alone. Kevin helped with everything, covered the tracks, forged documents. They stole over $1 million combined. There was a long silence on the line. Then she said something I didn't expect. I was wrong. About you, about what you did. I didn't want to believe Marcus could do something like that. It's easier to blame whoever brings the bad news than to accept that your son is a criminal. But I saw the evidence today. I heard what the prosecutor said. You were right, and I treated you horribly. Then the tears came from her and from me. Apologies and forgiveness flowed down the phone line. It didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the weeks of rejection and accusations, but it was a start. My mother asked if we could meet, really talk, start rebuilding. I agreed immediately. We arranged to meet Sunday morning at Denny's, where we used to have breakfast when I was a child, when the family was still intact and happy. I felt that going to a place from our childhood could help us remember when things were simple, before money and betrayal destroyed everything. Morrison called on Saturday with an update on Marcus and Kevin's bail hearing. Both were denied bail. The judge determined that with evidence of planned escape and the sophistication of the criminal scheme, they represented a clear flight risk. They would be held in a federal facility until trial, which would likely take place in 4 to 6 months. Morrison also told me that Kevin was already considering a plea deal. His lawyer had contacted the prosecution, offering full testimony against Marcus in exchange for a reduced sentence. If accepted, Kevin could get only 5 to 7 years instead of the 20 he was facing. The news left me with mixed feelings. On one hand, Kevin testifying would strengthen the case against Marcus and secure a conviction. On the other hand, it meant he would get away relatively easily after being just as guilty as my brother. But Morrison explained that this was how the system worked. You make deals with smaller fish to catch the big ones. And in this case, even though Kevin was significantly guilty, Marcus was the mastermind, the brains behind it all. He deserved the heaviest punishment. I reluctantly agreed that the prosecution should do whatever was necessary to ensure Marcus faced the maximum consequences. Meeting with my mother on Sunday was difficult but necessary. She had visibly aged in just a few weeks. Grayer hair, deeper lines around her eyes, a frailty that hadn't been there before. We sat in a booth in the back and ordered pancakes that neither of us actually ate. She apologized again, more elaborately this time, explaining how the shock had made her react defensively, how it was easier to blame me than to accept that Marcus, her perfect son, was capable of such evil. I understood. Grief makes people do irrational things, and she was grieving the loss of both her sons in a way. She asked me about Amy and the children. I told her that Amy had filed for divorce, that she was trying to protect what was left of the assets for the children, that Jake and Sophie were in therapy to process everything. My mother began to cry silently. Those children didn't deserve this. Nobody deserved this. How could Marcus do this to his own family? I had no answer for her because I had no answer for myself. I'd thought about it constantly, trying to understand the psychology of someone who could betray so completely everyone who loved him. The only conclusion I came to was that Marcus had lost his way somewhere, that greed and addiction had corroded the decent man he may have once been. We agreed that my mother would start spending more time with our children, that we would slowly rebuild our family relationship. She also offered financial help if we needed it. She had some savings that Dad had left. I politely declined, explaining that we were just surviving and that she needed to keep that money for her own security. But the offer meant something. It meant she was on my side now, that family wasn't just about blood, but about choices, and she was choosing to stay with me instead of the son who had destroyed everything. It was a small victory amidst so much disaster, but it was something. On Monday, I returned to work determined to focus on saving Carter Logistics. I had lost weeks reacting to the legal drama. Now I needed to be proactive about rebuilding the business. I scheduled meetings with each of the clients we had lost, prepared to be completely transparent about what had happened and how I was ensuring it would never happen again. Some refused to meet with me. Others listened politely but made it clear they wouldn't return. But some, especially those who knew my father, gave it a chance. They said they would see how things developed during the trial before deciding on future contracts. Frank Delaney walked through the office with a final report. He had completed his investigation and compiled everything into a 200-page document that would be used in the trial. As he flipped through it, he saw Marcus's double life mapped out in painful detail. Every lie, every fraudulent transaction, every secret meeting with Veronica, every lost bet at online casinos. It was a complete autopsy of how someone destroys their own life and the lives of everyone around them. Frank put his hand on my shoulder as he left. "You did the right thing, Daniel. It doesn't always seem that way in the moment. But in a few years, you'll look back and know you did what had to be done." I hope he was right. The following months dragged on in a mix of endless legal proceedings and desperate attempts to salvage what remained of Carter Logistics. Kevin Richardson accepted the plea deal in May, agreeing to testify against Marcus in exchange for a 6-year sentence with the possibility of parole in 4. His full confession was devastating. In a 40-page deposition, Kevin detailed every aspect of the scheme, from the first day Marcus approached him with the idea to the final transfers before they were discovered. He admitted to falsifying audits, manipulating accounting records, and creating false corporate documents. Most importantly, he confirmed that I had absolutely no knowledge of or involvement in the scheme. This finally legally cleared me of any complicity. Marcus's defense collapsed practically overnight. His lawyer, Robert Ashford, tried to negotiate a plea deal as well, but the prosecution wasn't interested. They had Kevin as a star witness. They had complete documentation of every crime. They had evidence of an escape plan. Helen Bradshaw, the assistant district attorney, said Marcus could plead guilty and accept 20 years, or go to trial and risk 30. There was no third option. Marcus, surprisingly, chose to go to trial. Ashford told me confidentially that he tried to convince him to accept the plea deal, but Marcus was convinced he could win over a jury, that he could play the gambling addiction card as a disease and reduce his sentence. The trial was scheduled for September. Meanwhile, I struggled to keep the company alive. We managed to recover 2 of the lost contracts after the clients saw my full cooperation with the investigation and the changes I implemented. I hired a new accounting firm, installed triple-blind audit systems, and made Jennifer a co-signer on all corporate bank accounts as an additional layer of oversight. She had quit her part-time teaching job to help me with the administrative side of the business. It wasn't ideal, but it was what we needed to survive. Our revenue was still only at 60% of what it used to be, but at least we weren't bleeding anymore. In June, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Veronica Simmons, Marcus's lover. She asked to meet me, saying she had things I needed to know. My first instinct was to tear up the letter and forget about it. I owed nothing to that woman who had been involved in the destruction of my brother's marriage. But Jennifer, always wiser than me, said I should at least listen to what she had to say. There might be useful information for the case, or it might give you some closure. Reluctantly, I agreed to meet her at a neutral cafe in Beaverton, far from anywhere acquaintances could see us. Veronica was different from what I expected. In Frank's surveillance photos, she looked glamorous, confident, the kind of woman you picture when you think of a married man's mistress. In person, she looked tired, scared, younger than her 28 years. She sat across from me, her hands trembling around a teacup she hadn't drunk. She began by apologizing, which caught me off guard. I know you don't want to hear this, but I need to say it. I didn't know he was married at first. When I found out, I should have ended it, but I was too emotionally involved. He promised he would leave Amy, that he was waiting for the right moment. I was stupid and selfish. I deeply regret it. I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence linger, wanting her to feel uncomfortable. Finally, I asked why she had requested our meeting. Veronica took a deep breath and told a story that changed my understanding of everything again. She said that Marcus had told her about the financial problems months ago, had admitted he was taking money from the company, but painted it as if it were money he was entitled to, that you were unfairly blocking his access. He said you were controlling, that you were trying to push him out of the company your father founded. She believed him because that's what you do when you're in love. You believe the lies you want to believe. But then Marcus was arrested, and Veronica began to investigate, to read newspaper articles, to understand that she had been a piece in something much bigger and more sinister. She also discovered something that even the police didn't yet know. Marcus had planned to take her with him when he fled. He had promised they would go to Costa Rica, start a new life together with the money he had hidden. Veronica had even quit her job a week before he was arrested, believing that she would soon be on a tropical beach with the man she loved. The revelation had destroyed her almost as much as the arrests had destroyed our families. Veronica then pulled an envelope from her purse and slid it across the table. Inside were printouts of emails between her and Marcus from the weeks leading up to the arrest. In them, Marcus detailed escape plans, mentioned specific bank accounts in the Cayman Islands that the prosecution hadn't yet discovered, and most shockingly discussed hiring someone to physically intimidate me if I got too close to the truth before he could escape. His exact words in an email, dated 3 weeks before everything blew up, were, "If Daniel becomes a problem, I know people who can convince him to back down. Nothing permanent, just a good scare. He deserves it, after years of treating me like an employee instead of an equal partner." I felt bile rising in my throat. Marcus hadn't just stolen and lied. He had considered violence against me, his own brother, the person who had grown up beside him, who had defended him his whole life, who had trusted him blindly. And he had thought of physically hurting me simply for being too close to discovering his crimes. I looked at Veronica and saw that she was crying silently. She said she hadn't turned the emails over to the police yet because she was afraid that Marcus would send someone after her from prison. But I also knew it was the right thing to do, that I deserved to know how far Marcus was willing to go. I retrieved the emails and thanked her. I couldn't feel any sympathy for Veronica, even understanding that she too had been manipulated and used by Marcus. She had made choices. She had chosen to continue the relationship even after learning he was married. But at least now she was trying to do the right thing, even if it was too late to undo the damage. I took the emails directly to Morrison. He was visibly alarmed. "Daniel, this changes the case from fraud to potentially conspiracy to commit assault. If Marcus actually contacted anyone about hurting you, we're talking about very serious additional criminal charges. We need to take this to the FBI immediately. The following days were a blur of interviews with federal agents. Veronica had to repeat her story multiple times, handing over her laptop and phone for forensic analysis. Technicians managed to recover additional deleted emails that showed Marcus indeed arguing with me, with a man referred to only as Ricky in the emails. There was no evidence that Marcus had actually paid or hired anyone, but the intent was clear in the texts. Helen Bradshaw decided to add charges of conspiracy to commit assault to the already extensive list of crimes Marcus faced. Each new charge meant a few more potential years on the final sentence. Marcus was now looking at 35 to 40 years if convicted on all counts. Amy called me when she heard about the new accusations. Her voice was a mixture of shock and resignation. She had reached the point where nothing Marcus did surprised her anymore. "Daniel, I don't know if it matters right now, but I want you to know that Jake and Sophie ask about you. They ask when they're going to see Uncle Daniel again. I know everything is complicated, but they don't fully understand what their father did. They only know that the family is broken and they miss you." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I hadn't seen my nephew since before everything exploded. I had avoided it for fear of complicating things even more, but they were innocent in all of this. I arranged with Amy to pick up Jake and Sophie the following Saturday for a day trip. When I arrived at the house, I used to visit every week for family dinners. The children ran to hug me as if they hadn't seen me in years, which was almost true. Jake, at 9 years old, asked directly, "Uncle Daniel, is it true that Dad stole money? People at school talk about it." My heart broke. I knelt down to his eye level and chose my words carefully. "Your father made bad choices that hurt a lot of people, including you and your mother and me. Adults sometimes make big mistakes, but what I want you to know is that none of this is your fault, and you are still loved." I took the kids to the Portland Zoo, something we used to do together before everything fell apart. Sophie, 7 years old, held my hand as we looked at the elephants and said something that stuck with me. "Uncle Daniel, when Daddy comes home, will we be a family again?" I had to crouch down again, not trusting my voice to keep it steady. "Sophie, your daddy won't be home for a very, very long time. He has to pay for what he did. But you and Jake and your mum will be okay. And I'll be here for you, always." She nodded solemnly, processing information no 7-year-old should have to process. When I returned the children to Amy at the end of the day, she pulled me aside. "Thank you for doing this, for not abandoning them because of what Marcus did." I nodded. "They are my nieces, Amy. I love them regardless of anything else." She hugged me then, a desperate hug of someone drowning and clinging to any life raft. "We both lost Marcus," she said. "In different ways, but we both lost him." I agreed. It was one of the few things Amy and I shared now, besides the children. We had both loved a man who turned out to be someone completely different from who we thought we knew. July brought further complications. One of the clients Marcus had defrauded with the shell companies, a large distribution corporation called Pacific Freight Solutions, decided to sue us civilly for $5 million in damages. They argued that as a co-owner I was legally responsible for the company's fraudulent actions. Patricia Chen, the corporate lawyer, mounted a defense based on my proven ignorance of the scheme and my full cooperation with authorities. But she was honest about the odds, 50-50 at best. Civil juries are unpredictable. They see a corporate victim and a business owner, even if you're also a victim, and sometimes they decide you should have known. The possibility of a $5 million judgment haunted me. I didn't have anywhere near that kind of money. It would mean personal bankruptcy, losing the house, probably losing the company too. Everything my father had built, everything Jennifer and I had worked to create, would disappear. And it wouldn't even be for something I did, but for failing to detect my brother's crimes. The injustice of it burned, but Patricia explained that it was the risk of being a partner in any business. Joint liability meant that sometimes you paid for the sins of others. It was a brutal lesson in choosing your partners carefully, but it was a lesson that came 20 years too late. In August, a month before Marcus's criminal trial, Morrison called me for an urgent meeting. He had an unusual proposal from Marcus's defense. Ashford had contacted him offering a private settlement separate from the criminal case. If I agreed not to testify against Marcus at trial, if I publicly pleaded for his clemency, citing illness and family history, Marcus would direct Amy to return some of her divorce assets to me to cover my losses. It would be perhaps $200,000, not the $500 he stole, but something. In return, I would essentially have to publicly forgive him and ask the judge for mercy in sentencing. The proposal left me speechless. Did Marcus really think I would sell my integrity, betray the truth, and help him get a lighter sentence for $200,000? After everything he'd done, everyone he'd hurt, he still thought he could manipulate me. The audacity was staggering in a sickening way. I looked at Morrison and said without hesitation, "Tell Ashford Marcus can go to hell. I will testify. I will tell every truth I know. And I will not plead for clemency for a man who considered physically harming me to protect his crimes." Morrison smiled. He expected that answer. He just needed to ask formally. "I will communicate their refusal." The refusal apparently enraged Marcus. According to Ashford, he had a breakdown in prison when he found out, shouting that I had destroyed his life, that he would never forgive me, that we were enemies now and forever. The word enemies stuck with me, brothers becoming enemies. It was the kind of tragedy you read about in books or see in movies, not something that should happen in real families. But it had happened to us. Marcus had crossed lines that transformed brotherly love into something cold and unrecognizable. And there was no going back. Even if one day in the distant future he got out of prison, even if he apologized, even if he tried to rebuild, we would never be brothers again. That bridge wasn't just burned, it was atomized. September arrived carrying the weight of the impending trial. Jury selection began on a humid Monday, typical of Portland in the fall. The federal courthouse was packed with journalists, curious onlookers, and some of our staff who had taken time off work to attend. Jennifer was by my side every day, her hand intertwined with mine like an anchor, keeping me from drifting away in a sea of anger and grief. I watched as 12 ordinary citizens were chosen to decide my brother's fate. 7 women, 5 men, ages ranging from 24 to 68. Each represented a chance for justice or, in the worst-case scenario, for Marcus to somehow convince them that he was more victim than villain. Helen Bradshaw opened the case with a devastating 45-minute statement. She painted a meticulous portrait of Marcus as a calculating predator who systematically stole from family, business, and clients for years. She used charts showing the flow of money, presented timelines of the forgeries, and most impactfully, played audio recordings of intercepted phone conversations between Marcus and Kevin, discussing how to expand the scheme. In one recording, Marcus laughed as he described how he had convinced me to sign documents without reading them completely. His voice echoing through the courtroom, that casual tone of superiority, made me feel physically nauseous. The jury was visibly shocked. Ashford tried to counterattack by portraying Marcus as a sick man, a victim of pathological gambling addiction who had lost control. He brought in an addiction specialist who testified about how compulsive gambling alters brain chemistry, how addicts do things they would never normally consider. It was an understandable but fundamentally flawed strategy, because even if the jury accepted that Marcus had an illness, he had still made deliberate and calculated choices for years. Addiction could explain the gambling. It didn't explain the meticulous falsification of documents, the creation of shell companies, the planning of an escape to another country, or discussions about physically intimidating me. These were the actions of a calculating criminal, not a desperate victim. My day to testify arrived on Thursday of the second week. I was nervous in a way I had never experienced before. I'd rehearsed with Morrison dozens of times. I knew every question that would come, but still my mouth was dry when the officer made me swear to tell the truth. I sat in the witness chair, and for the first time in months, I looked directly at Marcus. He was different. He had lost weight, his face thin and pale, his eyes sunken. The clothes Ashford had provided for him to appear more sympathetic to the jury hung loosely on his shoulders. But when our eyes met, what I saw was not regret or shame. It was defiance, pure anger, as if I were responsible for him being there. Helen Bradshaw guided me through the testimony with surgical precision. I began by recounting our childhood, establishing that we had been close, that I trusted him completely. I described the day I discovered the fraud, the emotions I felt, the extent of the betrayal. When she asked if Marcus had shown any signs of financial problems or addiction, I honestly replied no, that he had hidden everything with elaborate lies and manipulation. The hardest part was when she presented the emails discussing bullying me. She had to read aloud my brother's words, considering violence against me. My voice broke. I had to pause and drink water before continuing. Ashford's interrogation was brutal, as expected. He tried to portray me as a controlling brother who didn't give Marcus proper respect or authority in the company. He asked if I might have been too harsh, too inflexible, forcing Marcus to feel he had no other choice. I maintained my composure and calmly replied that Marcus had complete authority over finances and administration, that I never questioned his decisions until I discovered they were criminal, that he had stolen not out of desperation, but by choice. Ashford tried to make me admit that I might have missed signs, that I had some responsibility for not detecting the scheme sooner. I acknowledged that yes, I wish I had paid more attention, but that the responsibility for the crimes lay entirely with Marcus. Kevin Richardson testified on Friday. He had made a plea deal, so he was legally obligated to tell the whole truth. Watching my former accountant, a man I'd known for 15 years, describe in detail how he and Marcus had conspired to steal from me was surreal. Kevin explained exactly how they manipulated the accounting books, how they created convincing fake invoices, how they transferred money through multiple accounts to make it difficult to trace. He also confirmed that I had never been part of the scheme, that in fact they regularly discussed how to keep me in the dark. At one point, Kevin started crying, saying he was ashamed that Marcus had convinced him I wouldn't miss the money because the company was doing well. Kevin's most revealing lie was about a specific conversation with Marcus 6 months before they were caught. Kevin said he had been nervous, that he wanted to stop the scheme before it was discovered. Marcus had replied that they couldn't stop now, that they needed a few more months to accumulate enough for their planned escape, and that Daniel was too naive to figure it out anyway. He would never suspect his own brother. Hearing that, knowing that Marcus had consciously gambled on my trust in him, that he had used my brotherly love as a tool to commit crimes, was one of the sharpest pains of the entire process. It wasn't just betrayal, it was deliberate predation disguised as family. Amy testified the following week. She had been called by the prosecution to establish the impact of Marcus's crimes on her family. Dressed conservatively, without makeup, she described the destruction of her marriage, the trauma of the children, the discovery that everything in her life was a lie. She spoke about finding evidence of his mistress, about discovering secret debts, about the terror of not knowing how she would feed her children because Marcus had emptied all the accounts. In a particularly devastating moment, Amy described how Jake had asked if Daddy didn't love them anymore because he had chosen to steal instead of taking care of the family. Several jury members discreetly wiped away tears. Ashford's cross-examination of Amy was uncomfortable to watch. He tried to suggest that she should have noticed Marcus's problems, that perhaps he wasn't paying enough attention to the marriage, forcing Marcus to seek comfort elsewhere. Amy stood firm. I responded that I worked full-time as a teacher while raising 2 children and managing the entire household, because Marcus said he was too busy with business. That I had trusted my husband as wives should be able to trust him. That the blame for his crimes was 100% his, not hers, not mine, not anyone's, but Marcus Carter's. The jury clearly responded well to her. I could see in their faces that Amy was a sympathetic victim and that Ashford's attempt to blame her had backfired. Veronica Simmons also testified, reluctantly. She was under subpoena and clearly didn't want to be there. Her testimony about Marcus, his extramarital affair and escape plans added another layer to the portrait of a man living multiple secret lives. When Bradshaw asked if Marcus had shown any remorse for the crimes or the people he hurt, Veronica honestly replied no, that he always spoke as if he were a victim of circumstances, never acknowledging his own agency in the choices he made. She also confirmed the emails about potentially intimidating her, saying that at the time she thought Marcus was joking, but now realized he was serious. Marcus's defense called character witnesses, people who had known him before the crimes, neighbors who said he was a good father when he was home, college classmates who remembered him as honest and hard-working, an addiction therapist who had never treated Marcus but spoke generically about how addiction can turn good people into criminals. It was all superficial and unconvincing. As Morrison explained during a break, character witnesses work when the defendant admits guilt and pleads for leniency. When the defendant denies responsibility and blames others, as Marcus was doing, character witnesses just seem disconnected from the reality of the case. Marcus decided to testify in his own defense against Ashford's advice based on gossip Morrison had heard. It was a disaster. Marcus stepped onto the platform and immediately began portraying himself as a victim. He blamed addiction, but also family pressure, the difficult economy, clients who didn't pay on time. And most revoltingly, he tried to suggest that I had been controlling and condescending, that he deserved more respect in the company our father founded. He said I had always been Dad's favorite, that he had lived in my shadow his whole life, that the theft was a twisted way of trying to prove his worth. It was cheap therapy mixed with manipulation, and the jury clearly wasn't buying it. Hello everyone and welcome back. For those of you who have been following this journey, today we reach the final chapter. The trial had been a brutal 3 weeks, but the cross-examination of my brother, Marcus, was the turning point. Bradshaw, our lawyer, was relentless. She methodically dismantled him on the stand, forcing him to admit one by one to the lies he had built. He confessed to consciously falsifying documents, to creating shell companies of his own free will. He even admitted to planning his escape, ready to abandon his wife and children. When Bradshaw brought up the emails where he discussed intimidating me, Marcus tried to laugh it off, claiming it was all a dark joke. But Bradshaw was prepared. She presented phone records showing 3 calls from Marcus to a man named Ricky Mendez, a man with a criminal record for assault, just 2 weeks after those joking emails. You could see the panic in Marcus's eyes. He stammered, claiming he knew Ricky from way back, that the calls were about something else entirely. But the damage was done. The jury saw right through him. They saw a man caught in his own web, improvising desperately. Bradshaw's final question hung in the air. Mr. Carter, do you regret what you did to your brother, your wife, your children? Marcus just stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Finally, he mumbled something about regretting the circumstances, not his actions, not the pain he caused. He regretted the circumstances, as if he were a victim of fate, not the architect of our family's destruction. The closing arguments were powerful. Bradshaw painted a clear picture of premeditation, sophistication, and betrayal. She asked the jury to send a message that you can't destroy lives and expect a slap on the wrist. Marcus's lawyer, Ashford, made an emotional plea about treatment over punishment, about the suffering of Marcus's children. It was a good performance, but it couldn't erase the mountain of evidence or Marcus's chilling lack of remorse. The jury went to deliberate on a Monday morning. Our lawyer, Morrison, warned us it could take days, even weeks. But after just 6 hours, they were back. My heart was pounding out of my chest as Jennifer squeezed my hand. The jury filed in, their faces grim, none of them looking at Marcus. Morrison whispered that was a bad sign for the defense. The forewoman, a bank manager in her 50s, stood up. Her voice was steady as she read the verdicts. Guilty, misappropriation. Guilty, wire fraud. Guilty, forgery. On and on it went. Guilty, conspiracy to commit assault. Guilty on all 17 counts. Marcus collapsed into his chair. I heard a sob from behind me. It was my mother. I hadn't even known she was there. The judge scheduled the sentencing and banged his gavel. As they led Marcus away, our eyes met across the room. The anger was gone. All that was left was emptiness, a hollow acceptance that he had burned everything to the ground. Leaving the courthouse was a blur. Reporters were shouting, but Jennifer guided me to our car. And in that car I finally broke. I cried with a force that surprised even me. It wasn't relief or joy. It was grief. Grief for the brother I once idolized, for the family we could never be again, for the innocence Marcus had stolen from all of us. Justice had been served, but it felt like a funeral. It was the end of something that was once beautiful, long before greed poisoned it all. The 6 weeks leading up to the sentencing felt like living in suspended animation. The conviction was final, but the punishment was still up in the air. Morrison explained that with 17 convictions and over $1 million in fraud, Marcus was facing a baseline of 25 to 30 years. The prosecution would argue for more. The defense would plead for less. Back at Carter Logistics, things were slowly starting to turn around. With Marcus convicted, some of our hesitant clients started to come back. We even signed a major new contract. I hired 2 new people with impeccable references and installed audit software that watched every single transaction. Jennifer officially became our CFO, bringing a level of transparency the company had never known. The civil suit from Pacific Freight Solutions was also settled. I had to agree to pay them $250,000 in damages over 5 years. It felt deeply unfair, paying for Marcus's crimes, but our lawyer advised it was better than a long, expensive court battle we might lose. My relationship with my mother remained strained. She'd come for Sunday dinners, but a heavy silence always hung between us. She never mentioned Marcus. One day, she told me something that cut right to the bone. I lost 2 sons, Daniel. One to prison and one to the pain of having to put him there. Amy, Marcus's wife, divorced him 2 weeks after the verdict. She got the house, full custody, and changed her name back to her maiden name. She was trying to erase him, and I couldn't blame her. I tried to be there for my nephew, Jake, and my niece, Sophie. Jake, at 9, was having the hardest time. He was acting out in school, getting into fights. One afternoon, he just exploded in my car, screaming that he hated his father and he hated me for sending him to prison. I just let him get it all out. When he quieted down, I told him, "Jake, you can hate the situation. You can hate the choices your father made. But don't hate me for doing the right thing. If I hadn't, he would have just disappeared and abandoned all of you." He broke down crying then, admitting he was just scared and confused. I promised him I would always be there for him, and I shared something my own dad once told me. Life will throw things at you that you don't deserve. The only thing you can control is how you respond. You can let it destroy you, or you can use it to become a better person. The sentencing day arrived on a rainy Thursday in November. The courtroom was less crowded this time. Marcus was brought in wearing an orange prison uniform. He looked like he had aged 20 years in 2 months. His hair was almost white. He stared straight ahead, avoiding everyone's eyes. Bradshaw, the prosecutor, stood and argued for 35 years. She laid out the cold, hard facts, the sophistication of the scheme, the betrayal, and the conspiracy to commit violence. Then Ashford, Marcus's lawyer, pleaded for 15 years, citing Marcus's addiction and the needs of his children. Then it was my turn. I had to speak. I walked to the podium, my hands shaking. I told the judge, "Your Honor, for 32 years, Marcus Carter was my hero." I spoke for 10 minutes, not just about the money, but about the emotional wreckage, the destruction of trust, the sleepless nights, and the moment I learned my own brother had considered having me harmed. I ended by saying, "Justice won't bring back the brother I lost, because that man never truly existed, but it can stop Marcus from hurting anyone else." Amy spoke next, her voice breaking as she described the impact on her children, how their entire lives had been built on a foundation of lies. Finally, the judge asked Marcus if he had anything to say. He stood, and instead of remorse, his face twisted with anger. He looked right at me. "Daniel, you destroyed this family," he spat. "You could have handled this between us. Instead, you chose revenge over family. I hope you can live with that." A stunned silence filled the room. The judge looked at Marcus with utter contempt. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice like ice, "in 28 years on this bench, I have rarely seen a defendant so utterly incapable of accepting responsibility. You stole, you betrayed, you conspired to commit violence, and even now you blame everyone but yourself." The judge paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "This demonstrates a complete lack of remorse or potential for rehabilitation." He then delivered the sentence, a punishment that reflected the gravity of every lie, every stolen dollar, and every broken heart. And so, this long, painful chapter comes to a close. Thank you for listening to this story. It's been incredibly difficult to share, but your support has meant the world. If you've been with us on this journey, please consider liking and subscribing. Thank you again, and I'll see you in the next video. The judge continued, "This court takes corporate fraud seriously, especially when it involves betrayal of family trust and positions of fiduciary responsibility. The sentence must reflect the gravity of the crimes, deter others from similar conduct, and protect the public. Considering all factors, including the 17 convictions, the amount of money involved, the duration of the criminal conduct, the sophistication of the scheme, and especially the complete lack of remorse demonstrated today, I sentence you, Marcus Andrew Carter, to 32 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole before 27 years have been served. In addition, you will pay full restitution to all victims in the amount of $1,240,000. It is ordered." Marcus collapsed, literally collapsed in the chair, face in his hands, body trembling with sobs. 32 years old. He was 41 now. He would be a 73-year-old man when he got out, if he lived that long. His children would be middle-aged adults. His life as he knew it was over. Officers approached to take him back to detention. As they helped him to his feet, he looked at me one last time. There was no more anger now, just utter defeat. I nodded once, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement that this was the end, truly the end. He was led away, the chains on his handcuffs clinking in the silence of the room. I left the courthouse with Jennifer by my side. There were reporters waiting, but Morrison dealt with them as we slipped into the car. Once inside, I just sat there for a long time without starting the engine. Jennifer didn't say anything, just held my hand. Justice had been served in the fullest possible way. Marcus would pay for his crimes. The victims would eventually receive some restitution. The legal system had worked exactly as it should, but it didn't feel like victory. It just felt like devastation on all sides. A family destroyed, children without a father, a brother I loved turned into a federal prisoner number. I had done the right thing, but doing the right thing had cost me almost everything. I drove home in silence, rain pattering against the windshield, the grey November sky reflecting how I felt inside. When we arrived, Emma and Lucas ran to hug us. Jennifer had asked the neighbour to stay with them during the hearing. Emma asked how it had been, and I simply said it was over, that Uncle Marcus was going to be gone for a very, very long time. Lucas, at 6 years old, asked if that meant we wouldn't be sad anymore. I picked him up and told him the gentlest truth I could muster. We're going to be sad for a while longer, buddy, but little by little it will hurt less. And we'll be okay. Our family will be okay. He nodded against my chest, and I held him tight, grateful to still have family to hold on to. That night, after the children were asleep, Jennifer and I sat on the back deck, despite the cold. She had made hot chocolate, and we were wrapped in blankets, looking out at the dark backyard. She asked how I felt, and it took me a long time to answer. "I feel like I survived a war," he finally said. "Like I fought a necessary battle, but lost important things in the process. Part of me is gone too. The Danny who believed that family was unbreakable, that love was enough, that good people always make good choices. That Danny died when I found out what Marcus did. And the man who's left has to figure out how to live in this new, harsher world." Jennifer hugged me tightly. "You're stronger than you think, Daniel. You faced the impossible and didn't break. You maintained your integrity when it would have been easier to look the other way. You protected your real family, me and the children, and even Amy and the nephews, instead of protecting a criminal just because he shares your DNA. That's not weakness. It's the strongest thing anyone can do." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to feel like I had won in some meaningful way, but all I felt was deep weariness in my bones and emptiness where a brother used to be. Maybe with time that would change. Maybe eventually I would be able to look back and see this as justice instead of just tragedy. But on that cold November night, sitting in the dark with my wife, all I could do was breathe and exist and hope that tomorrow would hurt a little less than today. The months following Marcus's sentencing were a strange journey through uncharted territory. Life went on, as it always does, but it felt different now, as if wearing new glasses that changed the color of everything. Carter Logistics was finally truly recovering. By the end of January, we had recovered 80% of pre-crisis revenue and signed 3 significant new contracts. I hired 2 more employees and gave raises to those who stayed during the tough times. Sarah, our veteran dispatcher, told me one afternoon that she was proud to have stayed, that the company seemed more honest now, more transparent. It was small consolation, but it meant something to know that at least Carter Logistics would survive and even thrive despite everything. Jennifer had proven to be a natural talent in financial management. She brought an attention to detail and insistence on clear processes that the company had never had before. We also hired an external auditing firm to review our books quarterly, ensuring that we would never again be caught off guard. The cost was high, but the peace of mind was invaluable. Clients noticed the changes as well. A purchasing manager from a large distribution company commented during a meeting that Carter Logistics seemed to be under new management in the best possible way. I honestly replied that it was because it was under new management that we had cut out the cancer and were now healing. The process of recovering Marcus's money was slow and frustrating. The $1.2 million restitution order looked good on paper, but was virtually impossible to enforce. Marcus had no significant assets. The house had gone to Amy in the divorce. The accounts that still existed held only a few $1,000s. The bulk of the stolen money had been lost in online gambling or was hidden in offshore accounts we couldn't access. Morrison had hired asset recovery specialists who were tracing the money through tax havens, but warned me that we would probably recover only pennies on the dollar, if that. It was another injustice piled on top of so many others. Kevin Richardson had begun serving his 6-year sentence in a minimum security federal prison in Sheridan, Oregon. He wrote me a letter in February, delivered through Morrison. The letter was long and full of apologies, explanations of how Marcus had manipulated him, and pleas for forgiveness. He said he was participating in rehabilitation programs in prison, that he had found religion, and that when he got out, he would be a different man. The letter ended by asking me to consider writing a letter to the parole board when the time came, arguing that he deserved a second chance. I tore up the letter without finishing reading it. Kevin had made choices just like Marcus. The fact that his sentence was shorter was only because he had snitched first. I owed him no forgiveness or help. My mother had started visiting Marcus in prison monthly. She never spoke to me directly about these visits, but Amy once mentioned that my mother would call crying after each visit, describing how thin and pale Marcus was, how hard prison was on him. Part of me wanted to feel satisfaction in that, justice being served. But mostly I felt just emptiness. Not joy that Marcus was suffering, but also no sympathy. It was as if the part of me that could feel anything about him had been cauterized, burned away until it no longer existed. My mother never directly asked me to visit Marcus, but she hinted a few times that it might be good for my closure. She always changed the subject. Jake and Sophie were slowly adjusting to their new reality. Therapy was helping, especially for Jake, who had gone through a particularly difficult period. He still had occasional outbursts, but he was learning to process anger in healthier ways. Sophie seemed more resilient in a way, her youth protecting her from fully understanding the permanence of the situation. She still talked about Dad as if he were just traveling for work, that he would return someday. Amy didn't correct her yet, letting the child maintain that illusion for a little longer. There would be years ahead for Sophie to understand the complete truth. Amy had landed a job as an assistant manager at a charter school, a significant pay raise from her previous job as a teacher. She had sold her large house and moved into a more modest but comfortable 3-bedroom apartment. She said it was actually liberating. Less space meant fewer memories. A new life without Marcus's shadow in every room. She had also cautiously started dating a physical education teacher from her school. When she told me, clearly nervous about my reaction, I assured her I was happy she was moving on. She had wasted 8 years with Marcus. She deserved real happiness now. In March, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Marcus, mailed from the Federal Correctional Institution in Victorville, California, where he had been transferred. The handwriting was careful, each word chosen with precision. The letter didn't begin with an apology or a plea for forgiveness. Instead, Marcus wrote about life in prison, the monotonous routines, the crushing boredom, the occasional violence he witnessed. He described educational programs he was participating in, books he was reading, how he had plenty of time to think about the choices he had made. Only at the end did he mention our relationship. "Daniel, I don't expect your forgiveness. I know I destroyed something irreparable, but I want you to know that I think about you and how things could have been different if I had made better choices. Take care of the children. Don't let them forget me completely." I held on to that letter for a week without replying. Jennifer asked if I was going to write back, and honestly, I didn't know. What purpose would it serve? Marcus would have decades in prison to think about his actions. My life had moved on, but something in the letter, perhaps the lack of obvious manipulation, perhaps the tone of genuine defeat, made me finally sit down and write a short reply. "Marcus, I received your letter. I'm taking care of Jake and Sophie, taking them to regular activities. They are good children despite everything they've been through. The company is surviving. Mom is doing well. I don't know if I'll ever forgive you, but I'm trying to let go of the anger because carrying it is hurting me more than it hurts you, Daniel. I sent the letter and immediately wondered if it had been a mistake. Morrison contacted me in April with news about the Pacific Freight Solutions civil lawsuit. The company had agreed to further reduce the settlement from $250,000 to $180,000 because some of Marcus's funds had been recovered through an accessible offshore account. It wasn't much, only $43,000, but it was divided proportionally among all the victims. My share was $17,000, a tiny fraction of what Marcus had stolen, but something nonetheless. More significantly, with the reduced civil settlement, the monthly payments I would have to make fell to a much more manageable level. For the first time in months, I felt that maybe I could actually overcome this financially. The media finally lost interest in the story. There were a few follow-up articles when Marcus was sentenced, but after that, the case faded from the news cycle. We were just another family tragedy of fraud, indistinguishable from hundreds of others that happened every year. There was something comforting about that, the anonymity gradually returning. I could go to the supermarket without people recognizing me and whispering. Emma and Lucas no longer heard comments at school. Slowly, very slowly, we were becoming just the Carter family again, instead of the Carter family of the fraud scandal. In May, on the first anniversary of the discovery of the fraud, Jennifer suggested we do something symbolic to mark closure. We decided to have a small, private ceremony, just us and the children. We drove to the Oregon coast, to Cannon Beach, where my father had taken us on family vacations when Marcus and I were kids. The beach was foggy and cold, typical of a Pacific Northwest spring. Each of us wrote something on a piece of paper about what we wanted to leave behind. Emma wrote sadness. Lucas wrote fear with Jennifer's help. Jennifer wrote anxiety. I wrote betrayal. We put the papers in a glass bottle, sealed it, and Lucas threw it into the ocean. We watched it float away on the waves until it disappeared. It wasn't magic. The problems didn't evaporate because we threw words into the ocean. But it was something. A recognition that we were trying to move on, that we wouldn't be stuck forever in that terrible moment when I found out what Marcus had done. We sat on the sand afterward, Jennifer and I, while the children ran along the beach looking for shells. "Daniel," she said, "you know you're going to be okay, right? It may not seem like it now, but we're going to get through this. We're going to build something better than we had before, because now we know what we're capable of surviving." I held her hand and nodded. I know, or at least I'm starting to believe it. The company continued to improve throughout the summer. By August, we were operating at 110% of pre-crisis revenue, actually growing beyond where we were before everything fell apart. Part of that was because I was working with a focus I'd never had before, channeling all the anger and pain into building something of value. Part was because Jennifer was a better partner Marcus ever was, bringing fresh ideas and questioning assumptions in ways that improved operations. And part was simply timing. The economy was improving and logistics was in high demand. Whatever the reason, we were not only surviving, but thriving. I hired a succession consultant in September to help plan the long-term future of Carter Logistics. I no longer had a brother to eventually take over the business. Emma and Lucas were too young to know if they would be interested. I needed to think realistically about what would happen to the company when I could no longer manage it. The consultant suggested structuring it as a corporation with multiple minority shareholders among senior employees, creating an incentive for them to stay and build with me. It was different from my father's vision of a family business passing through generations, but my father also hadn't foreseen that one child would destroy everything. Sometimes you had to adapt. Jake contacted me in October with a surprising request. He wanted to write a letter to Marcus. His therapist had suggested it as a way to express feelings that were bottled up inside him. Jake showed me a draft. It was brutally honest for a 10-year-old. It described how he felt when Marcus was arrested, the shame at school, the fear about money, the anger at being abandoned. But he also expressed confusion about still missing his father, despite everything. "I still love you, but I hate what you did," Jake wrote. "I don't know if I'll want to see you when I grow up. But Mum said it's okay not to know yet." He told Jake that the letter was powerful and courageous, and that he should send it if he felt right. 2 weeks later, Jake received a reply from Marcus. He showed it to me with Amy's permission. Marcus's letter to his son was different from the one he had sent me. It was full of apologies, expressions of love, and assurances that even though he had done terrible things, he had never stopped loving Jake and Sophie. Marcus promised he would use his time in prison to become a better man, someone Jake could be proud of someday. Was he manipulative? Probably. Was he sincere? Perhaps partially. But it wasn't my place to judge their relationship. Jake deserved to have any father he wanted, even if it was only through letters for the next few decades. Veronica Simmons also contacted me again, this time in person. She had appeared for a deposition in a related civil case and asked if we could talk. I reluctantly agreed to meet her at a cafe. She looked different, older, more tired. She began by saying that she didn't expect forgiveness, but wanted me to know that she had enrolled in a master's program in counseling, that she wanted to eventually work with women who had been manipulated by partners, as she had been. "I want to transform this horrible experience into something that helps other people not make my mistakes," she said. I said that was noble, and sincerely wished her good luck. We were all trying to find ways to live with the choices Marcus had forced us to make. On Thanksgiving, we met for dinner for the first time since everything blew up. My mom, Jennifer, me, Emma, Lucas, Amy, Jake, and Sophie. 8 people around the table where we used to be 12 when Marcus and Kevin and their families joined us. The absence was palpable, but we didn't talk about it. Instead, we focused on what we still had, a smaller but more honest family. Relationships based on truth instead of illusion. When it came time to say what we were grateful for, each person shared something. Emma was grateful for family. Lucas for his new puppy that we had adopted in June. Amy was grateful for a new beginning. Jake, surprisingly, said he was grateful for learning that he can survive difficult things. I looked around the table and realized Jake was right. We had survived, and in survival there was a strength we didn't have before. 3 years after Marcus's sentencing, my life had become something I could never have predicted on that terrible day when Melissa Grant called me with news of financial irregularities. Carter Logistics not only survived, it thrived in ways that surpassed even the best years under my father's management. We were operating at $4.5 million in annual revenue, 50% higher than before the fraud. We had 22 employees now, almost double what we had before, and we had just signed a 5-year contract with a major Seattle-based technology company to manage all of its distribution logistics in the Pacific Northwest region. It was the kind of contract that would transform Carter Logistics from a modest regional operation into a significant player in the industry. Jennifer had proven to be not only a talented business partner, but a visionary I never was. She implemented digital tracking systems that put us ahead of the competition, negotiated strategic partnerships that expanded our reach, and cultivated customer relationships in ways that generated genuine loyalty. When the Portland Business Journal ran a story on resilient family businesses, Carter Logistics was featured. The reporter asked me how we had overcome such a devastating scandal. I honestly replied that it was because we cut out the unhealthy part and let the healthy part grow. Sometimes saving something means being willing to lose pieces of it, even pieces you love. Financially, we had finally stabilized. Payments to Pacific Freight Solutions were almost complete, with only 8 more months of installments. We had managed to refinance our mortgage at a better rate and even started saving for the children's college again. We weren't rich, we never would be after everything we'd lost, but we were stable, secure. And there was something deeply satisfying about that, knowing that we had rebuilt from the rubble using only honest work and ethical decisions. Every dollar we earned now was clean, not tainted by fraud or lies. My father would have been proud of that, if nothing else. Emma had become a brilliant 14-year-old, interested in science and mathematics. She talked about wanting to study engineering at the University of Washington. Lucas, at 9, was more artistic, always drawing and creating elaborate stories. Neither of them talked much about Uncle Marcus, but they also didn't seem traumatized by what had happened. Jennifer and I had been careful in processing them through family therapy, ensuring they understood that they weren't responsible for the actions of adults, that families sometimes break down, and that's okay. They were becoming resilient, empathetic, and ethically grounded people. It was the most important victory of all. Jake was 13 now, and had blossomed in surprising ways. After difficult years, he had found a passion for robotics, participating in school competitions and winning awards. Amy told me that his therapist believed Jake had channeled his pain into something productive, using construction and programming as ways to feel in control of a life that had been chaotic. He still wrote to Marcus occasionally, short letters about achievements at school or important events. Marcus always responded, letters that Jake sometimes showed me. They were appropriate, encouraging, focused on Jake rather than self-pity. Perhaps prison had changed Marcus in some way, or perhaps he had simply learned to pretend better. Sophie, at 10 years old, was the most complicated. She had developed abandonment anxiety, clinging to Amy in ways that worried her therapist. She had occasional nightmares where Marcus would appear at the door saying he was home and then disappear again. Amy was dealing with this patiently, assuring Sophie that she would never abandon her, that what Marcus did wasn't a reflection of how much he loved his daughters, but of how broken he was inside. It was difficult conversation for a 10-year-old to process, but Sophie was trying. She had also grown closer to me, seeing me as a stable father figure who wouldn't disappear. I took her and Jake to regular activities, pizza dinners every Friday, movies on Sundays. My mother had aged significantly over the past 3 years. Now 76, she moved more slowly, forgot things occasionally, but her spirit remained strong. She visited Marcus religiously every 2 months, an 8-hour drive to Victorville that was becoming increasingly difficult for her. I had offered to drive her a few times, but she always refused, saying she didn't want to force me to see Marcus if I wasn't ready. I appreciated that. The respect for my process, even while maintaining a relationship with her imprisoned son. She would tell me little things about the visits, how Marcus was participating in educational programs, how he had become a mentor to younger prisoners, how he expressed genuine remorse. I had written to Marcus occasionally over the years, perhaps a letter every 6 months. They were short correspondences, factual updates about the family and the business, without any real emotional depth. Marcus always responded, his letters showing a gradual evolution in his thinking. The first letters had been defensive, full of justifications. More recent letters were different, more reflective, specifically acknowledging how his actions had hurt people. In the last letter, sent 2 months ago, Marcus wrote something that stayed with me. Daniel, I have spent the last 3 years trying to understand how I became the person who committed those crimes. Therapy in prison helped me see patterns, insecurities dating back to childhood, a need to prove my worth through money and success. None of that excuses what I did, but it helps explain it. I hope that one day you can see me as a flawed human being instead of just a monster. The letter had stirred something in me. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of acceptance. Marcus had made terrible choices that destroyed multiple lives, including his own. He deserved to be in prison, paying for those crimes, but he was also human, complex, capable of change, even if that change came too late. I discussed with my therapist, whom I had been seeing monthly for 2 years, whether to consider visiting Marcus. She said there was no right answer, that it was a deeply personal choice. If you go for the right reasons, not to give forgiveness he doesn't deserve or that you don't feel, but perhaps to see who he has become and to make peace with who he was. In December, almost 4 full years since the original discovery of the fraud, I made a decision. I drove to Victorville alone on a cold, clear Saturday. The trip took 14 hours with stops. I spent the night in a cheap hotel near the prison, not sleeping much, questioning whether I was doing the right thing. In the morning, I put on prison-approved clothing, left all my belongings in the car except identification, and passed through multiple layers of security. The Victorville Federal Correctional Institution was a massive complex of concrete and barbed wire in the California desert, a place designed to strip away dignity and hope. I sat in the institutional visiting room waiting for Marcus to be brought in, my heart pounding in a way I hadn't expected. When Marcus entered, escorted by a guard, I almost didn't recognize him. He was 53 years old but looked 10 years older. Completely white hair, a lean, muscular body that suggested hours spent in the prison gym because there was nothing else to do, eyes that had seen things he would never share. But when he saw me, his whole face changed. Immediate tears, not manipulative, but genuine. He sat across from me, and for a long moment we just looked at each other across the metal table. "Daniel," he finally said, his voice hoarse, "you came. I never thought you would." I swallowed a lump in my throat. Me neither. But here I am. We talked for 2 hours, the maximum allowed. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation like in movies. There were no hugs or declared forgiveness, but it was honest in a way our conversations had never been before. Marcus spoke about prison, about the violence he witnessed, about how the first few months had been hell because other prisoners saw him as a weak white-collar criminal. But he had survived. He had found his place. He had started teaching GED to other prisoners who hadn't finished high school. It was a small purpose, but it was something. He also spoke about regret, not abstractly but specifically. "I regret stealing from you. I regret lying to Amy. I regret that Jake and Sophie grew up without a father because of my choices." I told him about life outside, about the company's success, about how the children were growing up, about Jennifer and how she had been my salvation through it all. Marcus listened without interrupting, occasionally wiping away tears. When I mentioned that Jake was doing well despite everything, Marcus completely broke down. "Daniel," he cried, "take care of him, take care of them both. Be the father I couldn't be the uncle, the role model, the stable man in their lives. They deserve it." I promised I would continue, that it wasn't even a question. Jake and Sophie were my family as much as Emma and Lucas were. Towards the end of the visit, Marcus asked something unexpected. "Do you forgive me?" The question hung between us, heavy and charged. I took a deep breath before answering honestly. "I don't know, Marcus. Part of me wants to be able to say yes, wants to be able to release all the anger and pain. But another part still hurts when I think about what you did, not only to me, but to everyone who loved you. Maybe forgiveness isn't all or nothing. Maybe it's a process. Today, at this moment, I can say that I don't hate you anymore. I can say that I hope you use these years to become a better person, and I can say that I won't carry your betrayal as a burden for the rest of my life. Whether that's forgiveness or not, I honestly don't know." Marcus nodded, accepting it. "It's more than I deserve. Thank you for coming. Thank you for not giving up on me completely, even when you had every right to." The guard signaled that time was up. Marcus stood, hesitated, then extended his hand. We shook hands across the table, not a hug, but a connection. Take care of yourself, Daniel. Build a good life. Don't let what I did define you. I promised I wouldn't. He was led back, glancing back once before disappearing through the security door. I sat there alone for a few more minutes, processing what had just happened. It didn't fundamentally change anything. Marcus would still serve decades in prison. We would never be brothers in the way we were. But it was closure of some kind.